Okay, so we're going to talk about imaginary numbers and complex numbers. So imaginary numbers are any numbers that give you a negative value when you square them. So, for example, say you want to try to do the square root of -7. Well, if you did square root of -7 times square root of -7, you would get -7. But if you were to say type this into your calculator right now, it would give you an error message. Because there is no number times itself that gives you -7. So in mathematics, they invented this little number called I, which is an imaginary number. And I equals the square root of -1. So I could write this as the square root of -1 times the square root of 7. Sorry, that's a -1. So square root of -1 times the square root of 7. And the square root of -1 is just I. So we would just put an I there for square root of -1 times the square root of 7. And the convention is just to put square root of 7 I. And the I is not underneath the square root of 7. And so that's how we'd write it as an imaginary number. Okay? So this would be the square root of -1 times the square root of 16. Well, this square root of -1 would become the symbol I. Okay? And the square root of 16 is just 4. And again, the convention is to put the I second. So this just becomes 4I. So if you were to get this, the square root of -16, you would just rewrite it using these steps as 4I. That's the convention for how to write it. Okay? Now, a complex number is just a combination of a real number and an imaginary number. Oops. Imaginary. There you go. Okay. And you can see like there's the real part and then there's the imaginary part. Now, basically real numbers are basically every single number you've looked at up to this point. So like a whole number, a negative number, a fraction, a decimal, positive, like the square root of a positive number, like square root of +2, square root of +15. These are all the real numbers. We're only going to worry about imaginary numbers when we have a negative square root. So that's what a complex number is. And in the next video, I'll show you an example of why we would ever need a complex number.